Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, we ask that you subscribe, like us, and maybe even leave comments. All that helps keep us on the air. So today's guest is actually someone who goes to my church. Waverly Presbyterian Church. And when I found out that she was an author, I just had to have her on the program. So Janet Roberts writes character-driven contemporary fiction set wholly or partially in Western Pennsylvania, where her roots run deep. It's lush green mountains, warm sunny beaches.
In Erie.
In Erie. Okay. And that salt of the earth kind of people populate her writing as they do her life. Her readers know to expect a female character that is on a journey of self-discovery, resulting in the awakening of her own inner strength and power through facing adversity. She's had a lot of reviews, and some of them just say her books are cinematic. So let's hope that they eventually get translated to the screen. She's an award-winning author of What Lies We Keep, a cybersecurity thriller with domestic suspense, which was a finalist for the 2024 Hawthorne Award and winner of the 2024 Silver Medal for Fiction from Literary Titan. Her first two novels, The Narrow Gate and The Leaf Queen, won first place fiction from Pittsburgh's TAZ, the Author Zone. And I'm curious about that, so we'll have to find out what that's all about. Her memoir, Seven Thin Dimes, published in 2015, received a TAZ Honorable Mention. Her poetry has been published in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the San Fedele Press Art in the time of COVID-19. And she's a member of Women's Fiction Writers Association and Pennwriters. As a former global leader in cybersecurity education and awareness with over a decade of experience, she lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where Frick Park is her favorite place for a hike. And mine too. She loves to travel and has never been a library, bookstore, or ice cream shop she didn't like. So with that, Janet, I'm going to turn the mic over to you just to tell us about your spiritual journey before you get into some of your books.
Okay, well, I'm thrilled to be here. It's definitely the first time anyone's asked me about my spiritual journey. Been asked about cyber criminals, and I've been asked about my book a little bit, but this is a new one for me. So I would say, before I came here today, I looked up what spiritual was, because we get mixed up with spiritual and religious, and I wanted to see for myself kind of what that would be. And it's a personal exploration and quest to find enlightenment, peace, and a deeper connection with a higher power. So I think probably because I'm a curious person, and I was always reading, I was always interested in other cultures, other religions, other places. I grew up Presbyterian in Erie, Pennsylvania, and my mother is from the Pittsburgh area, where she grew up Presbyterian. So my parents were married here, I was baptized here, and we, grew up in Erie. So I was fully familiar with Christianity, from a Protestant or Presbyterian point of view. And the neighborhood I grew up in, Erie, was completely Catholic, except for about 3 or 4 families. So I was fairly familiar with that. Most of my friends were Catholic. And my mother's best friend from childhood is Jewish. So I was never unfamiliar with, the basic religions, maybe not Muslim until I was older. And I think part of my spiritual journey was just that I always was curious and I wanted to know more. Some parts of the negative parts were, running in as a child. Some kids said if you were Jewish, you didn't go to heaven or you weren't saved. And so I ran home and asked my mother what was going to happen
Yeah.
to her friend, right? And my mother gave me, probably she was cleaning or doing whatever, gave me a good response that she doesn't remember. And I think it was something along the lines of God knows when someone's a good person,
Yeah.
So I then went through joining, all the classes at 13 to join church. And we had a young pastor that I really liked because he brought in history, Aramaic, how parts of the Bible could have been translated with words slightly differently, and I took that through my life. At 17 or 18, a lot of the more conservative and rigid people in the church sort of pushed him out. And that was my first experience that in a church, everybody doesn't think like you do, and everybody doesn't feel like you do, and that sometimes everybody doesn't practice what you've been told Jesus wants us to practice. And so because I was young, I took that not well, and I didn't want to have anything to do with organized religion. I was very rebellious about that. I went off to college and started taking world religions classes. And what that taught me was a lot about other people's way of expressing their spiritual journey, but it brought me right back to what I always believed. It didn't water it down. It actually strengthened it, and it made me more inclusive and open to, I didn't understand how the Abrahamic religions were so alike. I understood how they were different because of all the fighting in the Middle East and the differences in denominations. And it was really enlightening for me to understand that if there was a focus on the similarities and not the differences. And so that sort of carries me through a lot of things that happen in our country and in the world now. But I think that made me more inclusive or open, because I came from Erie and it was very small, and I don't think I knew a gay person until I went to college. And so I think I learned to expand my mind, indefinitely in college, but also through being disappointed in things that happened when I was younger at church, and then starting to figure out, which type of church works for me, and also trying to be more forgiving and accepting of things that maybe I don't like and maybe they don't like about me. That's a growth thing. So a journey is a path, and it takes you in different directions. And if you embrace change and if you're curious, you're probably going to benefit a lot from it. And if you don't want to be on different paths, you won't, then your journey's just kind of going to be a straight line, I guess.
Right. So here you are back in a Presbyterian church. How did that happen?
Yeah, that's interesting because for a while I moved a lot for my career.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in Erie for a long time, and I went not regularly after college, and then I started moving. And so in Cleveland, I found a Methodist church, and I really liked one of my aunts had been a Methodist, and she said they were always more open-minded and they were always more fun. But they actually were when I went, they were great. And so I did that for a while. I never joined. I don't think I've joined a church. I thought about that before this podcast, probably good 30 years. I go, and every time I think about joining, either I would move from my job or I would something would stop me. So I don't know if I'll do it. I might, it's not off the table. When I went to Phoenix, I went to a couple Methodist churches. There were a lot of churches out there that were big evangelical. Everybody's not welcome kind of things. And I was certainly not fitting in any of their non-welcome categories, but just feeling not comfortable there myself. So I didn't go a lot, and my career was getting bigger. I was working long hours. And then in Illinois, I went to a Methodist church that I could walk to. And because they had a sign out front that said, everyone's welcome, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, like they had this whole long list. And I thought, okay, these people probably are more like me.
Yeah.
And so I went there for a while until I moved back here. And then I would walk up sometimes, to the church, but I worked a ton on the weekends and everything. So I made it sometimes I didn't.
Yeah. So cybersecurity, that sounds so exciting.
I know.
How did you end up in cybersecurity?
Well, I have an undergrad in journalism and I have a master's in communications. So when I went to Cleveland from Erie in 2003, I think, or 2004, I went to work at Case Western Reserve University in media relations, communications, and I did that. But then they lost their funding for the area that I was working in, and I had to find another job. And it was a recession, and lots of things were happening. So I ended up at Progressive Insurance doing internal communications, which I really didn't like very much, but I was assigned to the information security team for 10% of my work. And I was fascinated. I completely didn't understand what they were doing, but I was fascinated with what they were doing. And I kept going, trying to do more work for them. And finally, the chief information security officer said, I'd like you to come over and build a cybersecurity education program, security awareness program, they called it then. And I told him, don't you want someone who knows what that is? Because I don't really know what it is, And he said, no, I want somebody who can take geek speak and make it understandable to employees so they stop doing all the habits that they have that are causing the company to be, endangered. And I can teach you as much cybersecurity as you need to know. So I was at the time in a department with all women who fought with each other a lot, and I tried to stay out of it. And in the security, it was all men who were like really introverted and didn't talk much. And I thought, well, one way or the other, this is going to be a big change. So I went over, and it was probably the best thing I did. At that time, maybe 200 people in the world were doing that kind of work. And it was all just experiment and figuring it out for yourself. And I loved the guys I worked with. They became great friends and taught me a lot. So I found the topic completely interesting, even though I wasn't technical. And so I built a small program at Progressive, and then my boss left for American Express in Phoenix. And then he sent me a note and said, hey, they're looking for someone like you to redesign a global program. And so I had a brother who had been transferred out there by exporting goods. And so I said, okay, I think I'll ditch the snow and go for the sun and give it a shot. And I did that for a couple years, and Zurich Insurance kept asking me to come and build their first program. And I kept telling them I didn't want to move to Illinois, or I think the choices were Oklahoma City, LA, or Illinois, and not Chicago out in the, and I finally, I gave in, and I went and built their first, for 8.5 years until I retired. I built a global program from scratch for them for security awareness. So that's what I did.
You don't look old enough to be retired.
I am. I'm 65. I am.
Okay.
And so what security awareness is that you teach employees how to protect data, not to get phished, not to fall for scams, not to save data in ways that would, be dangerous to the company, and also how to do it at home, how to protect themselves at home. So it was a rewarding job in that way, because you were doing something employees wanted to hear and wanted from you. Yeah.
So this current book, What Lies We Keep, is well steeped in that security experience and training and all of that. I'm curious about your other books. Are they also in that realm? So this is your first?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, because they say write what you know, and you
well,
really
my first two
that.
books, I wasn't working in cybersecurity when I wrote them.
Oh.
So I wrote them in. It took me a long time. I wrote them while I was working at Progressive. Maybe towards the end I was, but I didn't feel confident enough that I knew enough, to use that, and I wasn't technical, and I was afraid of making mistakes. And so the first two I self-published myself, and they did okay, and they were just ideas I had, and I was kind of trying to see if I could do it. Could I write a novel and
Uh-huh.
finish it and then hire editors and, all those sorts of things.
Right.
And then I realized when I published them, by that time, I was at Zurich. I was in Illinois, and my job was 60 hours a week easy. And I realized who's going to market these books, which is why they probably didn't do as well, because I just didn't have the time. So with this book, I decided for the first time to try to, now I'd been in the business for over 10 years by then, probably 12. And I asked a lot of the guys who stood around me questions and used things that don't change as much because cybersecurity changes very fast. You could have a book out and things could have criminals think of new things all the time. So I try to keep it within things that are generally not going to change a ton. They're kind of bedrock pieces and all that. But yeah, I think the guys who worked with me at first, I started asking questions like, well, if you were going to embezzle money, how would you turn off the alerts? And they looked at me, they really eyeballed me and said, you know what your job is here. Your job is to educate people not to do those things. And then I explained that I was trying to write a book. So fiction. I said, it's all fiction.
Yeah, I noticed. I read your acknowledgments, and you were careful to pretty much name everybody who helped you out with that.
They did. Yeah, they're excited. They said it's their Andy Warhol 15 Minutes of Fame. They all bought the book, so because their name's in the back. So it's nice. Yeah. But they did. They worked great to help me.
Yeah. Well, also, you mentioned in those acknowledgments your time with your brother and your father in the library as you were growing up.
Yeah.
So was that really, a weekly event? Is that how
well,
that
my dad
out?
traveled for his job. And until he started traveling internationally, he was gone most of the week, and he came home, and he and my mom had a deal that he would get us out of the house on Saturday so she could have a break.
Okay.
And he took us usually to the library and then to the Warner Theater for a movie, sometimes. And he got books for himself to take on his trip. So he didn't necessarily pay that much attention if we were behaving or not when we were in there. But it was a beautiful, I think it's a bankruptcy court now, but it was a beautiful big old library with the woodwork and the polished banisters and the smells, and I could get 6 books. I always knew that, and I'd get them out. So most Saturdays he took us, once he was gone 2 and 3 weeks at a time traveling internationally, then not as much, but yeah.
Well, obviously you got your love of books and writing from
my parents,
early childhood experiences.
Yeah, my parents always read books to us when we were little, and they always encouraged reading, and there was always books all over the house. Yeah.
So as I was reading your book, I guess one thing that I feel is a sign of a good sermon in church, or a good book, or a good movie, is that it makes me cry.
Oh.
And your book managed to do that.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't try to make people cry, but okay.
Well, it's just that your character development is such that, I guess, I'm an empath, so, I identified with situations and the characters and just thought, oh, that's so sad.
Well, I'm reading a book called The Intuitive Author by Tiffany Yates Martin, who wrote The Intuitive Editor that I really, really liked, and so I went for this book. And this morning I read this and I thought, I'm going to take this and read it on Bob's podcast because it's about writing. So I've always been an empath, although I think corporate America kicked some of it out of me, and I'm trying to find it, find it again. Our creative work is about more than simply telling an entertaining story. Artists use their powerful singular perspective and voice in their work to affect people, their emotions, their worldview, their ideas, their thoughts, their beliefs, their assumptions, prejudices, blind spots. You can't deeply impact a reader unless you know what matters profoundly to you and infuse that in your work. Thought that was great. So I just picked it I sketched
So
it down.
what matters profoundly to you?
I think what matters to me, and I saw this long before I went in corporations because I worked in law firms for a while too. It matters to me that people prioritize how they prioritize things. I mean, it's not up to me how they prioritize things,
Yeah.
but I guess it's that, are you prioritizing being kind to others? Are you prioritizing your family and the things that, you you can get another job? This is how I feel. You
Yeah.
know, are you prioritizing what somebody's gonna rate you at work over having hours with your children or your sick relative or or spending time working on something like painting or that you're
Yeah.
passionate about. And so I think sometimes I saw a lot of that. I really, when I wrote this book, it wasn't starting out as a book. It was a friend of mine who I complained a lot about these people who only cared about titles and kind of like walked on other people to get somewhere and didn't
Mhm.
treat people that well at work. And she said, "Well, stop complaining to me. I'm tired of it. Go write about it." So I made up TED, and it was a little more of a vent, It was, and
Yeah.
then I took it to a workshop during COVID, and they said, "Oh, this guy is horrible. There aren't people like this." But
Yeah.
actually, I only did the horrible parts, but there were people who I think were just misguided,
Well, I think Jerry's even worse.
Oh, yeah, she's really bad. Well,
Oh,
Jerry, I had a couple managers like Jerry. So,
yeah.
I guess there is a little, she's amalgamation of
Uh-huh.
multiple things. But then the instructor at the workshop said, you just need to give him redemption, and readers want to see a character redeem themselves. They want to see
Right.
redemption. They want to
Uh-huh.
see someone struggle through things and find their way out. And then that's when it started to become a book, you know.
Yeah.
And I think I did write Jerry when I had a pretty bad, not the first boss. But most of my characters aren't one person. They're amalgamation of things that I see in a
Uh-huh.
lot of different people. I remember working at law firms and young lawyers telling me they hadn't seen their kids awake for a couple of days or a week.
Yeah.
And I just thought that's terrible.
Yeah.
That
Right.
it's terrible. So I don't mean it's not a lecture for someone. It's my observation that sometimes when you don't prioritize the things that you can't live without or that
Mhm.
you would be crushed and if you lost,
Right.
then you lose things anyway, or you make mistakes, or you do things that then you regret maybe or have
Yeah.
regrets. So I've seen a lot of things at work where people become obsessed, or they're so insecure that they come to believe that the corporation will validate them and make them feel better about
Mhm.
themselves. So I also am interested in characters that struggle to have self-confidence or struggle to find their better self or to love themselves,
Yeah.
and that they, you know, um, find the wrong way to go in their search. And so I hope my character's having a bit of a spiritual journey at
Right.
times,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause we all are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
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 The the scenes that you write uh, not only involve Pennsylvania, but
Mhm.
also involve Montana,
Yeah.
a little bit of Wyoming,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
Uh, so are those, it doesn't sound like when you described your job journey and moving around that
No.
Montana and
No.
Wyoming were part
No.
part of that.
I can explain that. Actually, there's a good story there. So my nephew Wes was a golf course professional, and he was the director of golf at Shooting Star in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And I came to just love Jackson Hole. I probably couldn't afford to rent a cabin there,
Yeah.
like a hut there, but I loved it. And he told me there's this Jackson Hole Writers Conference, and you could come stay with me and go. So I went. I think I went twice. I went twice, but I'm not. I think it was probably in 2017. And I went, and I could stay with him because if you've ever been to Jackson Hole, the hotels are very expensive. So he was a young bachelor, with a basement apartment, and I stayed in the little corner bunk bed, and we had a really good time. But he worked long hours on the golf course, and that was perfect. And I went to the writers' conference, and so I would joke with him all the time, when are you going to teach me to fly fish? Which no 20-something-year-old young guy wants to take his middle-aged aunt to go fly fishing. And he would say, I will sometime, or, we'll have to try that sometime. And so this keynote speaker at the writers' conference was a guy named Peter Heller, who I really like his work, and he wrote something called The Painter. And The Painter starts with a guy who's a painter who has all kinds of problems, and he goes out at midnight to go fly. He likes to fly fish at midnight under a full moon. He goes out to do that, and he witnesses a murder. And then the story goes from there, right? And so at the Jackson Hole Writers Conference, they tell them, the speakers and the people, the agents, the people on the panel, that one of the things that's required is that they go at the happy hour and mingle with the writers. Because I can tell you, in New York, they go in a closed room and we're all out there. So they're required. It's Wyoming. It's laid back. People wear shorts, people hike, and they want that feel. So Wes, my nephew, went with me to the happy hour, and then we were going to go to dinner, and we were having a little drink at the round table, and Peter Heller walked up and started chatting with us. And I said I loved his book and the fly fishing, and Wes started talking to him about fly fishing, and he said, "So when are you going to take your aunt?" And I hadn't even said anything. I hadn't said a word, right? And Wes, without flinching, says, tomorrow. I'm taking her tomorrow, which I had no idea we were going to actually do. Yeah. So it became me skipping all my workshops and getting a temporary license and wearing his clothes, which were way too big for me, and his boots. Yeah. And it was probably one of the most magical, amazing experiences I ever had in my life. And I just wrote about it in a notebook that I usually carry with me when I travel. Right. And then thought, I wonder if I'll ever use this. And then reached a point in this book where I thought, yep, Ted's going to go fly fishing. I think that's what I'm going to have him do. And that's how he went to. But then after the writers thing, I had time and Wes was working. So I rented a car and I drove over to Montana. And I drove to Bozeman to see my cousin's stepson, and then I drove down to Livingston, and then it was 4th of July weekend, and there was no rooms in the hotel there because I didn't really plan it that well. So I ended up out in this tiny town called Big Timber with this hotel that dated back into the 1800s, and they'd redone the original saloon, and there was no elevator. I had to drag my suitcase up 3 flights, and there wasn't a TV, I think, in the bedroom, but it was cool. It was super interesting, like a little, just like a little Western town. And I started to walk the street, and then I get in my car and drive around, and I realized I talked to people at the bar at night, to just locals, to just kind of get a sense of stuff. And then I just took notes, and I didn't know how I would use it. But then I decided that Ted was going to, I had already decided Ted had his priorities wrong and that he was not, he was running away from his roots. He was just wanted to be, he didn't know who he was, and he wanted to be validated by this, thing. And there was something that he was kind of ashamed of. And then I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to take the complete opposite. He came from a ranch, and he's bought into this corporate thing when a lot of people would rather go live, on the ranch. The other direction, and then that's how it kind of evolved that way. Yeah.
So what I've observed, and a lot of people have observed and written about, is that often this is a generational thing. Like the current generation has their priorities in better order, and they talk about, let me work from home because I want this work-life balance, and that's the first thing on my mind. You can pay me less, I don't care.
Yeah.
I want a balanced life. And it's turning the corporate world on its head.
Yeah, somewhat. It's good. I think it's good. I think that was a huge awakening for me. My staff of 4 people were all in their 30s. Nobody was over 40. I had
Hmm.
4 women, and I was working all these hours all the time, and they would come, we'd have a meeting, and they'd be talking about all the fun things they did on the weekend, or they would ping me and say, I did everything I need to do today. I'm going to go to yoga class, and then I'll come back and check all my emails. And as I let them do it, because they were so good at their job, but part of me started to realize there's nothing wrong with they're doing. Why do I feel like it's wrong? Why do I feel like it's lazy?
Yeah.
And you're such a boomer. And then I started reading books about,
Hmm.
how different generations work. And then they started to say to me, we want to have a chat with you about self-care because you're not doing it. We think that you're stressed and stuff. We want a manager who's not that stressed out. We think you should take time to do this, take time to do that, And at first I thought they don't understand. They don't have as big a job as I do. And then I started to think, there's some very good things they're teaching me here. I've become a workaholic from moving so much and not having any real sense of community, having friends all over the world and no hub, or no regular people in
Yeah.
my life. And so I would work all the time, and then I would buy plane tickets and go see my friends, or my family.
Yeah.
And so I really started to think about that. And when I turned 60, I just walked into my boss and said, I don't want to live in Illinois anymore. I
Uh,
didn't really like it there, and I want to go home. And I thought, well, if he fires me, I'll just have to deal with that, So that team had gotten me to the point where I was willing to. I didn't really get upset if I didn't get a great rating, if it was from a boss that I didn't
yeah.
really respect. I took time to take walks and hikes, and I just, got my priorities. I thought other people's priorities were bad, and then I realized I wasn't prioritizing myself a whole lot. So that's when he said, well, we don't want to lose you. We can't lose you. And so where do you want to go? And I said, I'm going to go back to Western Pennsylvania. He said, well, you need a good airport because I was being flown to Europe a lot,
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I have relatives in Pittsburgh, and it has a
Yeah.
better airport than Erie, I can tell you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sure.
and I wasn't really crazy about the weather in Erie. And so, my mom was still up there, and I would just moved here, and I would, go up there. So I went looking for a house here and
Yeah.
worked from home for the next 4 years and walked in Frick Park and took breaks and was more, like a
Yeah.
little more normalized. Yeah.
So Charlotte,
Mm.
the main female
Hmm.
character in your book, uh, mentions wishing that she did more of the meditations that she learned in her yoga class.
Uh,
And immediately I thought, okay, is Janet taking yoga and is she meditating and how's that working out?
I've tried to meditate. I cannot shut my brain off. I think I would have to go away somewhere for, and take some sort of treat to do it. I have tried. Yoga, I really like. And there were places in Illinois and some other places where I took yoga and I really liked it. I tried it at the church, and it's different how she does it from what I
Uh-huh.
like to do. I
Yeah.
like yoga flow, and I like to do more of that than what she's doing, which is fine.
Yeah.
But then a couple of the yoga studios here that I tried, it's more like aerobic yoga, which I'm a little too old to do, and I would come
Mm,
out of there not, feeling. So I do belong to a gym, and I don't always make it to yoga, and that would be something I should try to do more of. But
yeah.
I don't, I'm not a yogi, or anything, but
Mhm.
I like to do like easy yoga, and some of that meditation. It'd be good if I did it. It's on my Calm app that I use, but I only use the sleep
Uh,
stories to sleep better. And I've tried it, but my head is always thinking of the next book and the next, So,
yeah.
no, I don't meditate. I should, but I don't.
Are you familiar with the book, The Artist's Way?
Yes, I am. I read parts of it. I have it. I worked with the workbook a little bit, and it's interesting. Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interesting book.
Yeah. I think it's really made for a group study,
Uh-huh.
that book.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm starting a group study in January.
Okay.
And
I might be in for
I'll
that.
let you know about that.
Okay. All right.
But there's something that is recommended by the author. It's called morning pages.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that you do a brain dump every morning. When you get up out of bed,
Mm-hmm.
you write 2 or 3 pages of everything that's in your head.
Oh, yeah, I did read that. I don't do that, but I do write in the morning.
Yeah.
So I'm not a morning person, but I found, because I have a brother with a lot of medical issues, that I was not able to start writing at 10 o'clock, which is what I was doing, getting up, taking my coffee. I was thinking, oh, I'm retired now. For my job, I was often up at 5 or 5:30 and meetings at 6 or 6:30 because it's a European company.
Right.
And so retirement, I was like, great. However, there's a group of women. They're all in Women's Fiction Writers Association, but it's kind of informal, and it's called early birds write-in, and it starts at 8 o'clock. And so I found, regardless of what was going on in the rest of my life, I could be there from 8 to 9 and write. So although I understand what...
Is that in the morning?
Yeah, every morning I try to write from 8 to 9 with them.
Okay.
And then if I don't have other things going on, I continue. Although sometimes it's marketing stuff for the book, or, it's other things.
Right.
And I understand her concept, but it doesn't work for me, because I'm dumping all this stuff out on a page and I'm thinking I'm wasting my time because there's a book over there that I'm wanting to work on. But I do think the concept of getting up in the morning when your energy is at its best, when your head is clear, just opening up a document, whether you're already a book you're working on, whether you're revising, whether you just want to open up Canva and make a cool Instagram to market your book or something. Yeah. It's a good time to use your creative juices, because you haven't gone, loaded your head up with everything that goes on in your day. Yeah.
What I found from that brain dump, though, if my mind is on my book, then what I dump on the page is relevant to my book.
Yeah. Yeah. I think journaling is great.
Yeah.
Like, I journal, and sometimes it's nothing, and sometimes it's a lot. And sometimes I don't do it for a month, and then I do it again, but it's a good release. I think journaling is a good release for people. And when I have a new experience, when I'm traveling, I don't want to take my laptop out all the time. I take a little notebook, and I kind of just, I free write.
Yeah.
So I like to free write, but I don't, and that could be a brain dump, but I don't do it every day. Yeah.
So this book took 5 years from...
Yeah, it took about that long, yeah.
Beginning to end.
Because of my job.
Yeah. In terms of your process, was that pace frustrating, or was it sort of because you'd written 2 books prior to that, you had an idea that I'm not going to rush this process. I'm just going to do it until it's right.
So I was used to having to do everything around a demanding job. So what that means is, what's frustrating is, I would be into the book and getting somewhere, and then I'd have so much work I couldn't work on it for 3 months. And then I'd have to come back and say, where was I? What was I thinking? What was I doing? So in retirement, the nice part is I don't really have to do that. I can stay in the book, even if it's 1 hour a day. I'm in the project. But first draft, is an up and down experience. And after you're done with the first draft, and then you revise it, and then it's good to get a developmental editor or a copy editor, to go through that, and beta readers. So there's a lot of stages before the book that this person sees, from when you're done with the first draft. So it didn't take me 5 years to finish a first draft, but it took me 5 years to take that and go through revisions and beta readers and more revisions and developmental editor and those sorts of things until, and copy editors until it comes out. It's something you can publish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My daughter's an author. She's got 2 different series of 3 books in each of those series. She just finished the last book of the 2nd series. And what she found is that in looking for editors, that she was a better editor than the people who she was hiring to do the editing. So now she started an editing business.
Okay. A lot of writers do this. They become coaches or editors. My developmental editor for this book is a writer, who had written a number of books and had a price range I could afford. Some who just edit, they charge quite a bit. You can, if you get somebody who's really well known, you can end up paying $2,000-$3,000, for that. And so writers, most people don't understand when you buy a book for $18, the writer probably makes $1 off the book.
Yeah, I know. My daughter decided to go that route and pay the couple $1,000s. To get it done right. And somebody was experienced. And would you explain for the audience what a developmental editor is?
Sure.
Okay.
There's different types of editors. So a proofreader just proofreads your punctuation and your spelling and whatever. A developmental editor looks at the flow of the copy. Maybe it would be better if chapter 3 was actually chapter 2 and you move those, that there's not good transitions here. It's choppy and you just jump. That you said in chapter 2 that the person rode a motorcycle, and in chapter 5 you said they drive a car, because you're writing for such a long time and you're losing consistencies in there. And they work on, this doesn't make sense. The reader's not going to make sense of this, or this might not work. And then they come back and you start to go through it and make those changes. And a copy editor sometimes will give you some developmental stuff, but they're now checking, you had blue eyes here and now they have brown. You had like every single, you said this is a filtering word where you tell people feeling, all the time, or, and you use this phrase too many times. You use this word all the time, find a better one, So it depends on what kind of edit that you want. I like developmental edits because it makes somebody takes a step back and says, this would work better if you move this. This would flow better here. This is confusing here, that kind of thing.
Yeah, until my daughter was working with an editor. I'd never heard of a developmental editor, and yet it makes all the sense in the world.
It is. It's important. Yeah.
So your editor didn't come along with the publisher. That's a whole separate realm.
Well, publishing's a crazy business. So, people still come in and think, I'm going to get an agent, I'm going to be famous, and they're going to do all these things for me. I'm not going to have to do it. But in fact, even if you are with a big publisher, you end up doing a lot of the marketing yourself. Even big name people like Kristen Hanna, you'll find her on Instagram, marketing her book and everything. I went with a small independent publisher, and they have 2 kinds of contracts, traditional and hybrid. If you get a traditional contract, you don't put up money to publish with them, but you will end up paying for the copy editor that they have on staff, and maybe the book jacket designer and other things, and they're not going to help you market. And you'll get lower royalties with the traditional. If you have the hybrid, you're going to pay them a couple $1,000s to publish with them. Your royalties should be higher, and then on top of that, you're going to pay for the edit. And, if you pay for somebody before you submit, you already have a copy edit, and it's cheap, your person is cheaper than, otherwise they're going to say, well, we'll offer you a contract, but this needs to be copy edited, and then you're going to have to pay for that. So it's a little cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching when you go with the indie ones, but they publish faster. You could have it published in a year, whereas an agent could take a year to even find a publisher, and then 2
Yeah.
years for them to put something out. So yeah,
Right. Okay.
it's a lot. I know it's a big industry.
So we're about at the end of our
Okay.
time,
Uh-huh.
and I always ask the guest what they would like to leave the audience with, what words of wisdom.
Words of wisdom.
So this is your opportunity. Whatever words you want to leave them with,
Right.
this is your chance.
Whatever you do, everyone has to pay their bills. So whatever you do to work or to pay your bills, if it's not the thing that you dream about doing, that's okay. Find what you have a passion for and just find time to do it. Maybe it's crafts, maybe it's crocheting, maybe it's like being a great mom, maybe it's anything, and satisfy yourself because it's part of your journey. I think in this society, in this culture, people are led to believe that you've got to become like an influencer. You have to become famous.
Yeah.
You have to, everyone has to know you. You have to make money. You have to have things. And in actuality, when you leave this life, the only thing you take with you is the love that people give you, and the only thing you leave behind really is the love you give other people. So think about that for a minute and think, what is it that I always wanted to do, or what is it I love and have a passion for, and just make time for it. Just try to make time for that.
I think those are great words of wisdom.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
So audience, you heard it here. Take what resonates with you and put it into your life. Put the rest on a shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.